Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, aid workers in DR Congo are once again accused of exploitation and abuse. Over 20 women in the East say that they were coerced into having sex by men sent into their communities to help them face an Ebola crisis. Also, a Congolese anti-corruption coalition warns that DR Congo could lose up to $4 billion from murky mining and oil deals with sanctioned Israeli businessman Dan Gertler. And a tragic loss a millennia ago has been found and could shed light on the evolution of man. Around 78,000 years ago, a child was carefully laid to rest in a cave off of what is today Kenya's coast. Now, there are fresh allegations of sexual abuse by aid workers responding to an Ebola crisis in eastern DR Congo. Investigators from the New Humanitarian News Agency and the Thomas Reuters Foundation have spoken to 22 women in the city of Butembo who have described being offered jobs for sex. Many of those accused are thought to work for the World Health Organization, but staff from a total of 7 organizations have been implicated.
I was a WHO employee. I got that job through a condition that the man working for the response gave me. He told me that if I slept with him, WHO would hire me. I told him, no, give me the job first.
Well, last September, 51 women made similar claims of having been coerced into sex by aid workers. Earlier, I spoke to Robert Flummerfelt, one of the investigative reporters who interviewed the alleged victims. He told me more about the common threads in the stories of those women who came forward.
Myself and the team with the New Humanitarian, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, spoke to 22 women in a follow-up to our previous investigation that you mentioned from last September. And the findings indeed were shocking, demonstrated that this scandal and the phenomenon of widespread sexual exploitation and abuse was far more widespread than we had initially understood it to be. Women described being impregnated by responders in a number of instances and seeking abortions. In one case, a woman was reported to have died from a botched abortion after being impregnated by a man who was described as working for the World Health Organization. A number of instances in which women contracted sexually transmitted diseases and other in one instance, one particularly horrific instance of a woman describing being raped by a foreigner working for the World Health Organization and subsequently contracting syphilis. And generally, we got the sense with this reporting as well that we were just scratching the surface in terms of the sorts of abuse that occurred during this response.
Now, you've mentioned the World Health Organizations there. What other organizations were the alleged culprits working for, and has there been any response from any of them yet?
So across the 2 investigations in which we spoke to a total of more than 70 women, women overwhelmingly pointed the finger at the World Health Organization, but additionally IMC, IRC, ALIMA, UNICEF, IOM, the UN Agency for Migration, among a number of other NGOs that were involved with the response. But the overwhelming majority of cases were indeed from the World Health Organization. A number of the agencies that have been implicated have committed to investigations and since last autumn engaged in investigations, in some cases terminated men found to be guilty of sexual misconduct. However, in particular with respect to the World Health Organization, though our previous investigation was released 8 months ago, the independent commission that was appointed to investigate these findings began its work in the field to investigate this about 12 days ago. So it's certainly taken a lot of time, and indeed internally in the World Health Organization, throughout the entirety of the 2-year response, though a recent investigation from the Associated Press demonstrates that indeed they did receive allegations internally. They kept that quiet. They did not investigate the allegations that were made, and they acted like they were surprised when we released our investigation last autumn. So not just through the last 2 years during the response, but also since we released the autumn investigation, it seems not much has been done on the part of the World Health Organization.
But an investigative commission has been set up, even if it hasn't been running for very long. But when you kind of zoom out, it looks like these things keep on cropping up. Why do you think they keep on happening? Is it just a case of a few bad apples, or clearly more than a few bad apples, or is it perhaps something more systemic?
One of the more shocking things that people described to us, as an example, was men having women ferried to them in marked WHO vehicles to hotels that were bought out by the response, where responders and senior staff even would stay. And that sort of behavior sort of tapped into what people working for the response, as well as women, described as a sort of open secret. You know, the sense that everybody involved with the response knew that this was happening, and yet nothing was done. And that can only sort of indicate that there was an institutional culture of impunity that enabled these abusers to feel like they could do whatever it is that they'd like to do. And indeed, what they did was engage in horrific instances of abuse. And that really is less, as you say, of a bad apples issue and more of an institutional problem of impunity and serious power imbalances between people working in the aid sector and so-called beneficiary communities.
Robert Flummerfelt there. Now, a new investigation by anti-corruption coalition Congo is Not for Sale reveals that DR Congo could face losses of up to $3.71 billion from murky mining and oil deals with Israeli businessman Dan Gertler. A longtime friend and former President Joseph Kabila, Gertler has been subject to US sanctions since 2017. He's been accused of using his political clout to obtain mining concessions at knockdown prices. Clément Bonnereau brings us more.
In its report, Congo is Not for Sale estimates that 2 decades of suspicious deals between the Congolese government and Dan Gertler have cost the country close to $2 billion. This includes the sale of mining concessions at knockdown prices by the Congolese state to the Israeli businessman, who then went on to sell some of these concessions to international partners and even back to the Congolese government for huge profits. Dan Gertler also acquired rights to royalty payments, which are normally paid to the state and state-owned companies. Congo is Not for Sale warns that a further $1.76 billion in future royalty payments to Gertler's companies will be lost over the next 20 years if nothing is done. That's about half of the country's annual budget. The organisation therefore calls on the Congolese government to re-examine all contracts signed with Dan Gertler.
Nous avons demandé expressément dans notre rapport au président de la République de pouvoir enquêter, de pouvoir ouvrir une commission qui va enquêter sur les différentes transactions qui impliquent M. Dan Gertler, afin que nous puissions avoir une action en justice purement congolaise. Jusque-là, il y a des poursuites aux États-Unis, il y a des poursuites en Grande-Bretagne, il y a des poursuites en Suisse, sauf au Congo, alors que ce sont les Congolais qui sont les premières victimes.
The chairman of Gécamine, DR Congo's main state mining company, refused to comment on the report, dismissing it, I quote, as old news. The Minister of Mines, meanwhile, was unavailable for comment. Her chief of staff, however, insisted that DR Congo's government remains committed to fighting corruption and fraud in the mining sector.
Clément Bonnereau there for us. Now, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has been sworn in for his 6th term as president. Several African heads of state were at the ceremony in Kampala. Now, the 76-year-old's re-election in January came after a bloody pre-election crackdown in which dozens of protesters were killed. Opposition leader Bobi Wine, who came second in the election, accused Museveni of rigging the vote. Wine said that his home was surrounded by police who prevented him from leaving during Wednesday's inauguration. There were more protests in Cape Town on Wednesday against Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. Thousands of people marched in South Africa in support of Palestinians, including politician Mandla Mandela, the grandson of the late president and freedom icon Nelson Mandela. At least 56 Palestinians and 6 Israelis have been killed in a deadly exchange of fire between the Israeli military and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip since Monday. And finally, around 78,000 years ago, a child of around 3 was carefully laid to rest in a shallow grave at a cave on what is today the Kenyan coast. The remains remained untouched until they were recently discovered by archaeologists, who say that they may shed light on the cultural evolution of man.
The bones were found in 2013 in the Pangaya Saidi caves near the Kenyan coast. 5 years later, the circular grave was exposed.
Initially, we thought it was just another primate and that is it, or a monkey. But then when we brought it here in the lab, is when they actually cleaned and they found the first tooth, and they found it was a molar, and there were those guys there that are trained to look at it. They knew it was definitely human, so we were very excited.
The child was laid sideways and has been named Toto by archaeologists. The gender remains unclear. The child's bones were sent to a research centre in Spain. Scientists have just announced that this was in fact the oldest known human burial site in Africa, dating to around 78,000 years ago. The fact that there was a funerary rite sheds new light on the emotional life of early Homo sapiens.
We are getting a glimpse of their cognitive and emotional abilities at this point in time. For a very long time, we have only been looking at the technology, their subsistence, the environment, but we are beginning to understand now people having some emotional attachments to the dead, that they can be able to intentionally bury them.
This discovery also shows that early Homo sapiens lived in different parts of what is now Kenya. For a long time, many archaeologists had thought early humans only settled in the Great Rift Valley, further west from the coastal area.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.